My favorite part about CEDH is that any strategy can be defeated, and Ad Nauseam is absolutely no exception to that rule.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and MTG. I am your host, Ryan, and today we are talking about Ad Nauseam. All right, not just Ad Nauseam as a strategy and all that stuff, but taking down or fighting an Ad Nauseam. That is what we're going to be talking about today. You've seen Ad Nauseam to death, if you will. But today we're going to talk about how to fight it and how to win against it. And we have brought on a fantastic guest to be able to talk about this today. His name is Ian from Comedian MTG. How are you, Ian? Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me. My name is Ian from Comedian MTG. I am by myself on a YouTube channel, youtube.com/comedianmtg. In that channel, I occasionally do some gameplay, but I take a look at the more technical side of the format. Some of my favorite videos that I've started doing sort of just religiously now are top 4 breakdowns. So anytime there's a big CEDH tournament, I break down the top four decks, what the implications are, or the fact that those decks got to that top 4. You guys had your tournament a little while ago by the time this comes out, and that was one of the videos I broke down. So it's been a really exciting thing to be able to analyze the format in such a way. I definitely started playing CEDH as sort of a like rogue brewing type, and I still do that a lot. You guys may know me from brewing Dawnmaker Thrasios, Winota, Belby, my Opus Thief variant of Malcolm Vile Smasher, but as of late, I've also kind of gotten into the tournament grind part of the CEDH format. It's been really exciting and fresh. So if you want to learn stuff about that, videos about brand new decks coming out, new exciting stuff, all of that at youtube.com/comedianmtg.
Yeah, we couldn't have Mike do this episode because he would geek out about your decks all the time. So I'm the one who had to do it. Because, yeah, he loves your decks. I mean, I love them too. I think they're really great. You do a fantastic job. So
I've gotten many a message about Winota from Mike.
I can see that. He loves that deck. But I digress. All right, well, really cool. Thank you very much for being on the show. Mike especially thanks you. And before we go any further, let's go ahead and talk quickly about our sponsors. That is TCG Player, that is Dragon Shield, and that is support from viewers like you. So TCG Player, if you're going out to buy cards, especially some of these hot new sets that are coming out right now, looking at you, Modern Horizons 2, make sure you pick them up from TCG Player. They are fantastic, have great prices, really great policies, and you still get to support local game stores in doing so. When you buy those products, make sure you get them, protect them in Dragon Shield products. Playing with Power stands behind Dragon Shield all the way. They are the standard, in our opinion, for quality when it comes to TCG player accessories. I'm sorry, TCG accessories. And then finally, support from viewers like you. For those who sign up to Patreon, you get awesome perks, and support is what helps bring this type of content to you guys. So you get all kinds of really cool benefits. There's tiers at all different levels. We have things like Discord access, live streams, raw gameplay, behind the scenes footage. So check out and see if there's anything for you and consider supporting us, and we would really appreciate it. All right, so without further ado, let's dive into today's topic. So today we are talking about taking down Ad Nauseam. We're here to talk about fighting it. How to identify Ad Nauseam strategies, how to assess them, how to deal with Ad Nauseam players in a CEDH game, and all of those different types of things. So first things first, let's talk about Ad Nauseam, the card. So Ian, talk to us about Ad Nauseam, the card, in isolation, before we start to get it maybe into the wider strategies of Ad Nauseam. Right.
So Ad Nauseam kind of gets fundamentally broken in our format just because of the fact that our life total is doubled comparatively to the normal format in Magic, right? 60 card format. We have 40 life, which means 40 mana worth of cards is like the potential yield from an Ad Naus. Not to mention there are some decks that also are gaining life and yada, yada, yada. So we also have to realize that like lands don't have a converted mana cost, or technically speaking, their converted mana cost is 0, right? So that's just a free rip off the top of your deck. And now if you're building to play around an Ad Nauseam, not specifically the decks, but you can make the converted mana cost of your deck. I said like the average Ad Nauseam focus deck has a CMC of around 1.2, which means on average from like 35 life, we'll say that's like 20 cards, and no, actually that math is wrong. I think it's closer to like 25 cards, something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was doing 2. Either way, if one card that is an instant allows you to draw 20 plus cards, probably going to be a win con in your deck, right? Or gets you access to your win con plus protection plus blah 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 blah, right? It's a powerful engine.
So that basically is that in isolation. So let's talk about maybe a little bit more Ad Nauseam as an overarching strategy. So yes, we have Ad Nauseam the card. We talk about maybe some CMCs of the deck, but let's dig into what Ad Nauseam is, what we're essentially here to talk about. Ad Nauseam is fine as a card. Let's talk about it as a strategy. What is it? What is it as a strategy? And why is it so strong, especially right now?
Yeah, so there's 3 types of Ad Nauseam variants that kind of exist. There's what was historically referred to as a man strategy, MAN, being mid-range Ad Nauseam. Those have never been really considered like the best things to do with an Ad Naus. The greedier you are with an Ad Naus, the more you get paid off. With the invention of, I believe, Mad Farm, the original Mad Farm, back with Bruce Tarl and Timna, the term farm got coined. Now, that is a term that has been absolutely had its meaning dragged like Achilles through Troy, right? The meaning of that word has been destroyed. But what it originally was referring to, Timna and Bruce raising a farm together out in the middle of nowhere, because Bruce is obviously like an ox farmer. But it's kind of referred to now as like Timna farming value of cards off of your opponents, right? So the idea is you can't really have farm without Timna. And those decks are Ad Nauseam focused, definitely, but they also have Timna to draw you up to a really gas Ad Nauseam, or to draw you cards to protect your Ad Nauseam, etc., etc. And then there's turboadnaus, which in the current meta is the prevalent thing that everyone is most scared of. Now, Blue Farm is kind of one of those decks that's considered like the top of the format, and it's turboadnaus and its farm, and it's kind of that weird in between space. But turboadnaus being this idea that, okay, Ad Nauseam's gonna rip a ton of cards off of my library, and not only is Ad Nauseam gonna rip a ton of cards, but if I have all this free mana to get my Ad Naus out earlier, now all this free mana when I draw it off the top of my deck is basically ensuring that I can play a 5 mana spell in my main phase, and I'll draw enough cards off the top of my library that I can win that turn. It is sort of like greed incarnate. The sacrifice of a turbo Ad Nauseam deck is you don't see them playing things like classic CEDH tables like delay, mana drain, all of those like 2 mana interaction pieces. They're considered too slow in these decks. Instead of playing regular spot removal, you see them playing things like bounce removal, because yes, it can bounce your opponent's creatures, bounce their threats, but it also can pick up your own dockside, right? And also bounce things tend to hit things that threaten that deck more often. So it's basically saying, all right, I'm going to take out about 30% of this deck's card quality, but turn the speed up to 11. I don't care if I'm not going to survive this long game. I'm going to win on turn 2.
Very interesting. So, we started with Mad Farm. We went into, turboadnaus, and we've seen things, like you said, like Blue Pod, and then we're seeing a lot of Grixis shells, really, that are playing into the turboadnaus strategy. We're seeing Pevish Crom,
Rog Silas.
Roger Silas, over and over and over. We got a bunch of different things, too. But so why is it so strong right now? Why is it so well poised in the meta that it's become this quote-unquote force to be reckoned with right now?
So the funniest thing about this is that I think this is the biggest misconception about Ad Nauseam. Before before Protean Hulk was unbanned, before partner prevalence, that kind of stuff, there was this period of time for about like 3 months, and then partners came out there's Protean Hulk unbanning, or maybe the other way around. I wasn't playing then. But basically, before that, people were calling for the ban of Ad Nauseam from EDH. It was a dominant card type. It was just a dominant card, and it proceeded to dominate a bunch of games, right? And if you're thinking about like the old decks in CEDH, things like Doomsday Zur, or like then eventually Tymna Thrasios Zur, and all of these things, Tymna Thrasios, Adnaus, and Doomsday piles, these decks that were just efficient pieces, usually in Esper, and they would just draw you a ton of cards with Adnaus. You'd be playing things like Angel's Grace, which don't see as much play anymore. At the time, win cons weren't nearly as efficient. And to throw stuff together instead of needing multiple tutors and stuff, you're like, whatever, I'm just going to draw 20 cards. And that'll get me my win con. Now, obviously, the speed of the format and the speed of interaction, all of these things, Adnaus has adapted to it. But then Flash was printed. And when Flash was legal, yeah, you could definitely go for your 5-mana instant, but the average person would rather play their 2-mana instant and just win that way. And Flash, we all know, we're done with it. It's prevalent. Goodbye. However, the meta was still playing in a way that respected Flash. So, for example, right when Flash was banned, this is about, oh my god, how long has it been now?
April 2020.
April 2020. Wow.
It's a million years ago. It might as well be. It was a long time ago. It's a month that lives in infamy.
Oh man, I just remember live streaming with Braden and I at 11:30. We were the first content group to like make the announcement. It was insane. And yeah, so Flash gets banned, and now everyone's like, okay, well, the play patterns are still the same, right? You hold up interaction in your first turn, and eventually you develop your engines. But then the mid-range decks were like, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to hold up mana for Flash anymore. No one's winning on these first couple turns. I can play my Rhystic Study, and then I'll develop my Vexing Shusher, so that when I play my value engine, yeah, you guys can't counter it, and that's how you win the game. I'm going to jam my Seedborn Muse on turn 3, turn 4, and just outgrind you guys value-wise. And that worked for about, I would say, 6 months.
Yeah, no, 6 months, that's about right. Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, while we were living in this alternate reality where Seedborn Muse was just the bee's knees, jump all the way over to Finland, the Finnish meta. Even during Flash, the Finnish meta was just 4 turboadnaus decks, basically, in 95% of their pods. This is the place where River May Cry brewed Blue Farm, and where that deck came out of. Now, River, what many people don't know is River ended up top fouring one of the last tournaments when Flash Hulk was legal with Blue Farm, and had gone completely undefeated in the Swiss and only lost the finals. And so there's this really powerful turboadnaus deck that was competing in the Flash meta that no one was talking about. Mm-hmm. And so the Finns in the Finnish meta were just still playing these really powerful strategies. And they were like, hey guys, love that you're having your fun with your Seedborn Muse. It is nothing in comparison to what we're doing here. And I have to say, my old co-host from the CEDH cast, Braden, was one of the first people to be like, can we listen to the Finns? And so then they were like, okay, we're going to sacrifice all this card quality to just win the game. Meanwhile, you can play your protected Rhystic Study. The game's over. You know, you can try and develop your engines. You can play your Smothering Tithe. I remember when Smothering Tithe was a card, everyone was like, slam but slam my Smothering Tithe every single deck. And now it's like, yeah, I don't want to pay 4 mana and tap out, and they can just like nose over this, and then people are, what, you're gonna fight over my Smothering Tithe? Okay, like there's a turboadnaus deck at the table, what are you doing? This such different times. So the turboadnaus meta was able to take advantage of basically everyone still in this weird 6-month period between Flash and now. And I think that's where a lot of the idea of the turboadnaus dominance comes from, is this, it was just so dominant against what we were trying to do right after Flash that people are like, it's the best thing in the entire world. I can't play my mid-range deck into this.
Yep.
when all you have to do is really adapt. But we'll get there.
I think that's really interesting because that's essentially exactly what happened in our local meta, playing with our meta. Basically, after we were actually super late to pick up Flash because number one, whether or not you want to talk about theories around should you play the best deck in the format or whatever, obviously, you know, my opinion, I play Godo. So that answer is yes, I do play the best deck in the format. Fight me.
There it is.
Whatever. So, but what it basically is that we really didn't like Flash. We were like, okay, Flash, Hulk, got it, whatever. Oh, does anybody have a Graph-Digger's Cage? I don't. I win. Let's shuffle. And so that never really appealed to us. We were always a Paradox Engine kind of meta. Is really what we loved. It got banned, and then things started creeping up, and then Flash got banned. And basically what happened was it left a big chasm. A big void where there's these like super quick decks and these super strong resilient stacks decks to fight this quick deck. Well, the quick deck went away. Yeah. And all that's left is this giant like over one side. And so it almost like a dam broke and the wave had to crash back over. So this is where we saw our particular meta went you know, into more of the mid-range stuff, the Seaborn Muse and, you know, medium green. And, you know, that's what we played a lot of. It was a lot of that kind of stuff. Value engines. Yes. I remember when Smothering Tithe was super OP and like, oh man, we're done for, you know?
Remember when people didn't give you the stare for playing Faber Welder?
Exactly. They're like, oh, that's a good card, man. you know, and that's not to say it's not a bad card, but I digress. Right. But now we have, and what happened is it felt like the wave finally crashed on the other side of this, if you will. So I've always kind of said, whenever I speak to people, I say there's ebbs and flows in our meta. The ebbs and flows, and I've seen this ebb after Flash got banned, and it flowed slowly back over to this turboadnaus meta. So it definitely feels like, oh my gosh, turboadnaus came over and is just dominating everything in our format right now. And it's a really interesting point that you have that it was actually already like that. It just took some time to cross the ocean, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, Braden literally described it as CEDH as a whole is this ship. And I used to always kind of razz him about this metaphor, but it was actually pretty solid. But it was this big ship in the middle of the ocean, and it's going to turn, but the captain's got to slam that wheel, and the ship's just got to like focus in the right direction, and that's what it was for a really long time. And now I know I was playing on the Nexus, obviously during all the pandemic. Big shout out there, great place. Played a ton of games there,
absolutely.
And Deke, who's one of the mods there, I think admin as well, was playing one of the real early turboadnaus decks, which was the Golos turboadnaus deck. And I had played, I think I was on like 100 games of Dawnmaker Thrasios at this point, like just Thrasios grinding, Seaborn Muse, all of that stuff. And I had that ranked season, I had just completely dominated everything out there just because I was just out grinding everything. And then this deck comes out, and now suddenly Golos comes in, and I'm setting up my engines, and then there's a Beseiju, and I have my handful of counter spells, and I'm like, I still can't stop this. Because
that's right.
By the time the Nas resolves, Deke drew like, I don't know, 5-6 counter spells. Now people are telling me all these stories about, oh yeah, Deke beat us on turn 1, turn 2 the other day, and I'm like, I can't do anything against that. Like, they're panicking like an uncounterable Nas. Like, how do you even stop that? I don't have land destruction.
Yeah, exactly.
And so once again, like this drastic, how do we even touch what's happening here? And I think another thing with Ad Nauseam is it's so flashy, right? Unlike Flash Hulk, which was Flash Hulk, game's over. Sorry, that was probably terrible for the audio.
But also flashy, Flash Hulk. Yeah. I like the metaphor. I dig the metaphor. I like it.
But now when you're drawing 30 cards, right, and you're like, okay, do I hit my Mana Vault? All right, I'm going to play my Mana Vault into my Mana Crypt, and then tap, and then Dramatic Reversal, untap my Mana Rocks, and then sack all my lands to make a bunch of mana with this, and flashback in Underworld Breach, and get this loop started. And people get more like, they did all of those things on turn 2. Now, at the end of the day, if you lose to a Flash Hulk on turn 2 or you lose to a turboadnaus on turn 2, a Flash Hulk, the game's over, right? And turboadnaus thing, you've got to watch somebody be like, bam, bam, bam. He played 70 things on the second turn of the game. And I think that's why it looks so much bigger than it is now. And obviously, I'm not trying to compare them power level wise. I think not even close. Like, the Flash was oppressive, and glad it's gone.
Yes.
But Adnauseam looks so intense that it really sticks with people. People remember the times that they lose to the turn 2 Adnauseam. Now, you obviously heard people being like, oh, I lost to a turn 2 Flash, like, and then they're like, brr, and then they were done with it. Whereas, like, I lost to a turn 2 Adnauseam, I had to sit there watching him and ruminating in this turn 2 Adnauseam for like 10 minutes for them to win the game. And I think that's a big part of it mentally for people.
It's interesting because there's, I think that you put it really well. I think that there's a lot of spectacle around Ad Nauseam. Like you said, it's
great way to put
Ad
it.
Nauseam into spells 2, 3, 4, 10, on and on and on and on. So that's what Ad Nauseam is. Ad Nauseam is not Flash because you resolve Flash. There's plenty of games I remember when Flash started to infiltrate our meta. Long story short, Flash resolved. We didn't even bother to let them pull out Hulk. We just shuffled.
We're like,
100%. Yeah, you got 100%. It. Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
Flash resolved. Let's just shuffle. So basically, they cast 1-2 CMC spell in the flash, and the game was over. Because we knew how the rest of the line went. We just wanted to shuffle up. Ad Nauseam's not like that.
Right,
Ad
you're not
Nauseam
sitting there
is-
biting your nails just like, oh, I hope they flip bad, hope they flip bad, hope they flip bad.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man, what if... Oh, that was a really bad Ad Naus. Oh, man, they're playing Razakets, and they hit Pier and Raz all in the first 3.
Yeah.
We still got a chance, boys. You know, we're still in this. And But so there's so much more spectacle in the engine itself, and it's... Flash was just the win con, and some could compare it to an engine, but it really was. Once it resolved, that was that. Ad Naus is just an engine, and I think that when people start to think of it like an engine, they can start to maybe think of ways that they can
Disrupt it.
Fight that engine, if you will.
Despite Ad Naus being an instant, which is definitely a very powerful upside of the card, most Ad Nauseam decks. Now I say most because there's going to be those people who are like, actually, I play Emergent Zone in my Ad Naus deck. We don't need this right now.
Exactly.
But most Ad Naus decks win at sorcery speed. So yes, there are definitely positions Ad Naus can be resolved in which they resolve it in at instant speed, they have a bunch of counter magic, and then they win on their turn. But for example, I played in the last tier 1 con that we had. I was playing a Thrasios Vial Turbo Storm variant, and someone else was playing Najeela, but like a Ad Naus focused Najeela. I basically put myself in a position where I resolved an Ad Naus, and my opponent had to dig with their Ad Naus to answer mine. But it ended up not mattering because they didn't get a free counter spell, and I was able to untap for my turn first. So despite the fact that their Ad Naus was able to resolve first, it didn't matter because it's at the end of the day, you need it to be a sorcery speed win con. So definitely one thing, like when we're talking about this, like comparison to playing around an instant like Flash, very different scenario, right? Obviously, ton more mana, ton more investment, and you need to usually get back to your turn or take the risk of trying this on your turn for it to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's also what led to the power of Peered to the Abyss.
Yeah.
Some people were super light on that card. They were super weak on it. They were like, oh, it's only a sorcery. It costs 7. Ad Naus is an instant for 5.
Now,
and you're like...
Now, to be fair, I am back around on Peer into the Abyss. I was very pro Peer into the Abyss when it was printed for like a month and a half, and then Hull Breacher was printed, and now I'm back on the get that card out of here
but
thing.
That's different. All right. Yes,
totally.
Ad Nauseam more powerful by the... Yeah, okay. That's different. We'll get into that. But, but basically what it was the idea that everyone was like, well, Ad Naus is an instant. I can do it at your instep. And be like, well, yeah, but a lot of times people don't do it in their instep, contrary to what you believe.
Yes.
There's times when Magic players get the idea that you can only cast instants on other people's turns. Like it's become the exact inverse of sorceries. And it's like, no, you can cast the main phase stack empty. You're allowed to, trust me.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just think you shouldn't. And there's actually a lot of times when you really should. Everyone tapped out and you went to your turn. Yeah, cast your Adnau's
Jam
main
it.
phase, win the game.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not taboo. Don't be like, well, I better hold open mana and pass. No, you could lose the game that way.
Yeah. I for those who don't know, Marchesa 2021, I was able to top 4 that event playing Rog Silas, which is the definition of a jam it and slam it ad nauseam deck.
All in Adnaus. I played more than my share. All in Adnaus.
There were definitely games where I held it up and won because my opponents tapped low fighting each other. But there were definitely games where, like, for example, one of the games I just had the turn 1 Adnaus and I was like, you bet I am slamming this right now. And I didn't win that turn, but it was turn 1. I sculpted a perfect hand, dumped the half of my Brain Freeze combo I didn't need in the graveyard, and was able to Underworld Breach with like 3 pieces of protection the next turn. And I was like, still great to jam it right now.
It's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about, this formidable force that is ad nauseam strategy. Yeah. We've talked about the ebbs and the flows, and basically what you're saying is that it's always been around, right? What do you think happened with Adnaus? I would say I would call the key moment, if you will, being Commander Legends.
Sure.
We can kind of mark these flagpoles in the evolution of CEDH over time.
Yeah.
And one of the, we have things like Flash being banned and Paradox Engine being banned. Well, I think another flagpole is definitely just all of the partners we got in Commander Legends.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about the flagpole of Commander Legends and what that did to Ad Nauseam as a strategy, and maybe even CEDH as a meta from an Adnaus perspective.
So at the end of the day, it's really important when focusing on CEDH. Once again, we're talking about the ship as a whole, not talking about micro metas, not talking about like there's definitely like this like top tier of CEDH players playing the best things in the format.
Yeah,
it all exists, right? And I've even been snooty enough to like think of myself in that realm at times, but like at the end of the day, it's still a variant of Commander. And I think, ironically enough, the ability to have versatility, a wide range of commanders that can all play the same strategy and be able to do the same thing is important. So, for example, right now in the Brewer's Corner on the decklist database of these places, there are like 13 different Grixis variants that have just come out because of Commander Legends. Now, it's very easy to argue that Kess Turbo Adnauseam was doing the exact same thing before Commander Legends and probably had the same prevalence that we are attributing to these decks now. However, people want to be unique, right? The average CEDH player, or the average EDH player, not everyone's going to just be like, I'm going to play only Kess Storm. Like, people aren't going to do that. Or I'm not going to just play Thrasios, Vile, Turbo. Those decks exist, but people want to be doing something unique. Now, if you want to be unique, you can play Obeka if you want to go wild. You can play Malcolm Vile Smasher, a list I really like. You can play Roger Silas. You can play Armix Crom. You can play Tevesh Crom. I can keep going on and on. And now people have the ability to say, this is my deck. I play Tevesh Crom only. I like this Adnaus variant because I have 2 card advantage people in the command zone, and Tevesh can go infinite with Baron and Dockside, right? That's my unique flavor of the Grixis meta. For me personally, I like playing Malcolm Vile Smasher because I think Malcolm is just a pushed card. And right, that's my flavor of Grixis. Now there are hundreds of more of people, or thousands of more people who get to like, this is my flavor of the best thing, and feel better about having their flavor. And I think now with all the talk of Grixis being the best, with Grixis getting new tools like Jessica's will, with people having the ability to sort of spread out within the same space, I think that's kind of why Commander Legends feels like this time in which it just took over the meta. And it's just because basically people had more variety to try and therefore were more willing to dip their toes in, I think.
That's really cool. And I would definitely agree with you. I I say to people over and over again when they come to us with the question, "Hey, is this still viable? Is X still viable? Is X CEDH or not?" And one of the first things I tell them is, it's always been CEDH.
Yeah.
Like, hey, is Xur still viable? Xur was always CEDH.
Yeah.
Xur didn't suddenly just become casually, EDH. It didn't just like fall off the boat, if you will.
That is such a triggering phrase to me. I have been asked so many times. Like, someone literally like a month and a half ago asked me in the Dawnmaker Thrasios server if that was still a viable deck. And I was like, it's a mid-range deck with an infinite mana outlet in the command zone. What do you mean is this viable? It's in 4 colors. Like, what are you asking me right now?
It's still viable. And the retort I always give people whenever they say that is, yes, it's still viable. People just like to play with shiny new toys. That's what it is. Roger was brand new. He's a 0 CMC commander in the command zone. Of course you want to turn your Mox Amber into a Mox Ruby. Yeah. It's flavorful. It's spicy. Right. You want to play with the new toys. And so that's what everyone's been doing. And they have been doing it with Ad Nauseam. At the end of the day, we're still doing these Ad Nauseam strategies. And I'm not saying that what they're doing is wrong. It's great. You absolutely go for a powerful engine and a powerful win con. Do those things. But you can absolutely take these different flavors and do things with them. Yeah. So based upon what
Ad Nauseam is the mannequin, and we are the people in the department store throwing different clothes on it.
I like that analogy. I like that a lot. So when you say, hey, Ad Naus has always been around, we've always had these tools, what is giving the illusion that it's different then? Because, we did see a wide range. We saw medium green. We saw these, Why does it feel, maybe is the best word, why does it feel like Grixis or Ad Nauseam strategy has become so strong in the last 6 months?
Sure. And when I go off on this point here, I do want to be clear. Ad Nauseam is still one of the best things to be doing in this format. I'm not trying to like come out here with a hot take that Ad Nauseam isn't one of the best things to be doing. It's very, very strong, and it's gotten new tools. Like, we did talk about Commander Legends. Of versatility in command zone is important. When I was talking about Malcolm, it's important to the fact that Malcolm has a creature combo in an Ad Nauseam shell, right? That's a new way of attacking the format that hadn't been done before from an Ad Nauseam deck. You can argue Anala, but that involves casting a lot of spells, right? So that being said, Ad Nauseam has gotten a lot of tools. Now let's move over to the point of why it feels so much now. First of all, Underworld Breach has been a huge part of this. I actually remember, it's actually really funny. I think it was Mike asked me way back, like my early version of Dawnmaker Thrasios. I was playing Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, and Brain Freeze. And Mike asked me, why are you playing this Brain Freeze card? It's always dead in my hand, and I hate having it here. And I was like, trust me, I know it looks weird, but you throw it with this here this here Underworld Breach card, and trust me, you're just gonna win the game. And he was like, all right, I'll trust you on it. I might cut it though. And that was, you got to think about it, that was only like a year ago, right?
I've got a dog on him so hard for saying he needs to cut. He was gonna cut Brain Freeze. Man.
But at the time, I was in the minority there for saying, no, you got to play this card. Trust me, the legacy players just had it banned out of their format, right? Like
it did. Like, Underworld Breach is banned in Legacy. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was immediately removed because of the stuff we're trying to play right now. But so Breach, people figuring out how to play Breach the most efficiently definitely was a huge part of this. turboadnaus has two attributes to it that I think are really important for the average player. One is it's sexy, right? It is like, there's no better way to describe it. You're like, yeah, I'm going to slam this Ad Nauseam, and now I'm going to play like 15 spells, and I'm going to win the game, and look at me, I'm storming off, and I'm so cool. And I'm not trying to like talk down on anyone. I love that feeling. It's hilarious.
It's the spectacle. Like
it's
I
the
said,
spectacle.
It's
yes.
spectacle. It's spectacle.
The spectacle of the card is definitely there, and it's exciting. You're like, okay, I have to plan this right, and like I had a bad nose. I gotta do the beautiful mind numbers in front of me, trying to figure out how to win this game.
I knew exactly what you were talking about. Just I pictured it and everything. It was good. Yeah.
And the other thing is that, well, I think there's actually even like a little micro point on top of that is people remember that happening, and then they're like, oh, that's what this deck does. I think people see the spectacle of it and they're like, oh, it's just a turn 2 deck. And you're like, that's not quite... You remember the times you lost a turn 2 Ad Nauseam way more than you remember the times you like had to fight over one turn 4 or 5 and they got there eventually. And blah, blah, blah. But the other thing is that it feels weird to say, but jamming an Ad Nauseam is super easy. It is, and I love the average CEDH player, but it is very hard to play this format like technically correct. It is, in my opinion, the hardest format that exists, period. It has a near vintage ban list. You have to know, it's not like there's an established meta, because there is an established meta, obviously, but like, look at the database, right? We counted it for the MLC, and there's like 130 decks on the database right now, and that doesn't even include brews that haven't been submitted to the database. It's 100 singleton cards. You see staples repeated in a lot of these decks, but there are 100 individual cards, and then suddenly someone's teching in a new card that's really good against this meta, and everyone's like, what? That's from Urza Saga. How did you even know this thing existed? And now, not only that, it's not only 100 card singleton. You have to know your 100 card piles, but you have to know 300 other cards at the tables and read 3 other human beings who all have their different agendas. And there's so many variables. Like CEDH would drive a mathematician insane because it
drives a normal man insane. Not to say that mathematicians aren't normal people. I take that back. That was the wrong way to put it. I apologize.
The next episode will be our public apology to mathematicians.
That's exactly what it'd be like. And our PS will be an apology. Yeah.
But it's so much easier to be like, all right, instead of holding up my counter spell and putting up the timing to like do this, that, and the other thing on turn 7, I'm going to play the game. When my cards fail me, I'm going to use my words. When my redirection fails, all of that stuff. Instead of doing all that, I can just play a Mana Vault and try to slam an Ad Nauseam on turn 2. Oh, they had open mana? Guess I should have thought of that. But that's the game to them, right? Like, it is so much easier to just go for it. Like, you hear all the people all the time who are like, I'm just gonna send it, like and it's very easy for new players who don't know how to counteract these things, and hopefully people in the audience can learn lessons from this conversation, right? So that they don't feel like they have to also just slam it. A pod full of people just going for it is gonna feel bad if you're the player trying to play responsibly. But that being said, if you play responsibly correctly, you can actually, basically, as we mentioned before, Ad Nauseam has such a low card quality to it because they give that up for speed. So if you use your resources correctly, if you play the game, if you take your steps and you pivot when you need to, and really think about your plays, sometimes these decks aren't going to be able to hold up to that, right? It's like playing Burn in Modern, right? Like sometimes yes, Burn can burn you out before you have a chance to do anything because they just point enough lightning bolts at you, right? That's the Ad Nauseam in this scenario. But if you're the blue-white control player and you take your time and you counter the right spell here and you play your timely reinforcements at the right time and gain that life back, you can easily control that game. Like, you win that game hands down if you know what you're doing. And I'm not saying that Ad Nauseam is like, it's just like a Jenga thing where you pull one piece out and it crumbles immediately. It's way better than that, and you have to give respect to it to be better than that. But it's much easier to jam it and go for it, to play that lightning bolt and point at your opponent's face, than it is to counter the right spell at the right time, play that timely reinforcements, and be ready for it. There are ways to do that, though, and I think that's sort of what we're going to get to in the end point of this conversation here.
And there are definitely times that will make you feel great because you do just go for it and you get there.
Oh yeah.
And so that makes it makes you feel great. And that is a lot of allure to a lot of red players, or maybe red decks is what I should say. Red burn, like you said.
Yeah.
Modern Legacy, they all have them.
Yeah.
And so to have this I'm just going to go for it mentality is a good way to get you your feet wet in it.
Yeah.
But, the good news is that there's actually a lot more depth to it.
Yes.
Than just go for it. Yeah. And timing when to go for it, when to hold back, reading other players. I agree with you when you say that CEDH is one of the most complicated formats there is. I 100% agree. But I think that there's a lot that you can learn about the depth of Ad Nauseam. And so having that knowledge is going to be instrumental in piloting it, but also how to stop it, playing against it. So let's get into that. So we know what Ad Nauseam is as a card, as a strategy. We understand the meta. We know where it's coming from. We kind of understand some of the nuances and the depth. Now let's talk about, hey, it's so prevalent. I don't want to play Ad Nauseam, or I'm not on Ad Nauseam, or I am on Ad Nauseam and someone else is. How do we counterplay or quote unquote stop Ad Nauseam?
One of the, obviously the de facto, everyone goes to this, is stacks, right? The thing about stacks is, this is something I've said many times in public, and I will say it again. 99% of players cannot play stacks correctly. And that is not an insult to the average intelligence people. I just think it's one of the hardest things to be able to play, because I have seen brilliant stacks players king make all the time. And it's not that they're doing anything explicitly wrong. It is just that they have that 0.01% that they need to get right or throw it off. Now, that is also indicative of the old way of thinking about stacks. There is a lot of conversation lately about what's people are calling the new stacks, or what I kind of coined as the proactive stacks. Things like Winota. Winota comes down, slams a bunch of things on the board, is advancing its own game plan while also being able to have the luxury of saying, like, oh yeah, my Eidolon of Rhetoric is just a creature that triggers Winota and like puts something on the board and stops my opponent at the same time. I'm 2-for-1ing here. Kenrith stacks is a huge example of that. That entire deck, the whole point of it is just to like get the game. You play 5 colors, the best stacks in 5 colors, and then, oh, well, I have this giant commander in the command zone, and I'm going to put a +1 counter on it and give it trample. Are you going to block? Oh, it's 7 power. Next turn, it's a 13/13. Are you going to block? Oh, it tramples over. And then doesn't matter if no one has cards in their hand, because you have a Kenrith in the command zone beating people to death, right? And it's a very aggressive, proactive deck, and you get to play the best colors. And now these proactive stacks decks are here, and they're able to leverage the fact that they have stacks, but still execute a game plan. And the problem with a lot of stacks decks of the past is that they were playing too many symmetrical stacks. So, for example, something like Winota breaks parity on Rule of Laws, because Winota plays things for free and gets the card advantage to get them for free via her ability. Therefore, casting cards is pretty irrelevant. I've literally told people not to play card draw spells in the deck, because it doesn't matter that you have cards in your hand. So you have to find ways that you are breaking parity on stacks effects. If you're playing a creature heavy deck, play a Thorn of Amethyst, because the Ad Nauseam deck can't afford to have all their non-creature spells taxed, but you have like 10 in your deck. Right? Like, and you have to be able to stop what your opponent's doing, but still present a win con. Still be able to present a threat at the table. This is where you get things like Deafening Silence being so popular. It's a turn 1 play, comes down super early. It is early enough that it stops most Ad Nauseam decks. And if your deck is built around playing a Deafening Silence, you can break parity on it and continue to execute your game plan, and you'll have a really strong advantage at that table. Things like Collector Roof. If you can break parity on a Collector Roof, that's great in the Ad Nauseam meta, because turns out you need a lot of free mana, and 95% of free mana is mana rocks.
And you need to be able to tap it the moment it comes onto the battlefield.
Exactly. Which is why people were playing around with like Blind Obedience and Manglehorn, all which make artifacts enter tap because it was just enough time, right? So it's all about finding these asymmetrical stacks that you can really work with. Now, this is talking about it through the lens of a stacks deck, but there are also options for decks that don't consider themselves stacks decks. So, for example, recently on the Razakats special for Into the North, one of the individuals there, and I can't remember their name at this time, but they are one of the like main people who play Razakats, and they exist in a 3 turbo meta. So every single one of their opponents is on turbo decks, which are usually really parasitic for a mid-range deck to have to fight against. But being able to break parity on things like Deafening Silence, and I think Deafening Silence is mentioned in the deck, but specifically a card like Lavinia. Lavinia is one of those cards that it doesn't always make it into a mid-range deck. But if you're playing against a triple turbo meta, you can play a card like that to adjust to that meta, right? It is a 2-mana hate bear that is going to be able to stop every single Ad Nauseam deck at the table 95% of the time. So it's about making slight adjustments. So here's Razakats, like this classic mid-range deck playing on these grindy mid-range engines that on paper is bad in a turbo meta, but with an adjustment to make it appropriate for that meta, playing Collector Oof, playing Lavinia, things that break parity on that meta.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that, you know, when you say that stacks is, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't great at playing it. And once again, this isn't to insult any stacks players. This also isn't to insult stacks as an archetype. It's really not. It's because it has a very inverted way of thinking. I've talked about this on another episode, where basically when you go into a stacks mindset, you actually have to not think about what you're doing like a lot of Ad Nauseam decks will do. Okay, I've this A into B into C into D, and if I get B, I need to go over to E. And that's what you think about. With a stacks deck, you actually have to flip it, and you have to go in the inverse. Table position. What's this person likely to do? What's this person going to do? Can this person stop that person? And so you actually have to go, for lack of a better word, inside out. I have to think about literally what everyone else is doing. Can I keep this hand? Is this going to stop it? And that's a hard paradigm shift. It's really difficult to flip it on, flip the script, if you will. And that's why there's been so much trouble with that. So, and, you know, to just say play stacks and stuff like that is okay, but you're gonna, there's going to be a learning curve to it. So that being said, what could be some other strategies that might help stop Ad Nauseam that aren't just a stacks plan, for example?
Yeah, exactly. So as I mentioned, the making adaptations to mid-range variants can help a lot. There are certain individual pieces that I have found to be really, really powerful in this meta. Things like, for example, cards like Ranger Captain of Eos. I call that type of card a loaded gun card. So you play this Ranger Captain on the field, and yes, you can use it proactively by silencing your opponents on your turn, because when you sacrifice it, it shuts off non-creature spells for that turn from all your opponents, but it doesn't stop it from you. However, say I played against this in a game the other day where I had to kill the Ranger Captain before my turn because I wanted to storm off. Say you're a deck like Yidris, and your entire game plan is like, I'm going to get some value, I'm going to connect with Yidris, and then I'm going to start the Storm Engine. But at any time, your opponent can say, no more non-creatures, stop it. You're not going to go for it. And now you have 3 people at the table. Say you're playing in a triple turbo meta. Every single person is going to have that thought as they go to their turn. And as we mentioned before, the average Ad Nauseam deck can't win at instant speed. So yes, you can probably resolve an Ad Nauseam over the top of a Ranger Captain, but it doesn't mean you can win on top of a Ranger Captain. So now there are 3 players who are all saying, okay, well, I'm not going to go off on my turn. Maybe the person behind me is foolish enough to wait. And then the next person goes, the fool behind me will definitely go for it. I'll just hold up my my Ad Nauseam and see what happens from there. Passes the turn. And then all of a sudden you're back to the Ranger Captain player's turn, and they can probably silence on their turn and go for a win. Or they can establish even more of an engine, establish a heuristic study. So now, while the other Ad Nauseam players are setting up, you're gaining card advantage. and still sitting there with this one Ranger Captain of Eos ready to go. Or with Lavinia, not only, say you play an early Lavinia, you are sitting there with a mid-range piece, right? This stacks piece that is shutting off your opponents. But as time goes on, your opponents are like, okay, I can now on my turn tap out to bounce the Lavinia. But if I go try and do this right now, I'm going to throw it to the person behind me. So then they have to basically play the game of like, what instant speed interaction can I use to get rid of something? And turboadnaus decks, to be clear, are usually pretty greedy. I remember when Braden first came up with Corvold, there was like a piece of removal in the deck. like singular. And it's mind-boggling. So now if you have a card like Lavinia that completely hoses their entire strategy, you play it.
Yeah.
And then they take their time. Some of them maybe tutor for the piece to remove it, and then they're kind of gesturing for position. Meanwhile, you as a mid-range deck are playing an engine. Maybe you're drawing more counterspells. So by the time they're like, heck yeah, get out of here, Lavinia, you're like, swan song. And so then you have to just make adaptations for what you're seeing the most. The hardest place to be in the meta right now is being a certain type of deck versus a triple turbo pod. It's just one of those things that is always going to be a challenge. And so you need certain pieces like that to be able to survive. The other thing is, I think with the speed of the format, we've gone to extremes when it comes to interaction. So, for example, one of the best performing decks recently was just, during one of the last tier 1 cons, was just Food Chain Sliver. And it wasn't the like Underworld Breach Turbo version. There was an Underworld Breach package in there, but it was Shaper's Advance, basically exact 75, having mana drain in first lever, delay, and a bunch of 2-mana interaction, and a bunch of just solid cards that were card quality options. Recently for the MLC, I've been playing Paco and Halden a lot. And that is another deck that just plays things like I even slotted in Misdirection to have even more free counter spells. One card I definitely want to encourage for anyone playing a blue deck right now: please don't sleep on Force of Negation. It's one of those cards you think like, oh well, I don't know if I have enough blue and I already have one force in the deck. But it is so punishing when someone goes for that turn 2 ad naus and you're like, Force of Negation, get out of here, stop it.
and exile, by the way.
And get that thing out of here. Yeah. So yes, as I mentioned before, looking for silver bullet pieces, look for your Force of Negation, look for your Lavinia, look for things that allow you to break parity. A brand new fantastic option is Douthie Voidwalker.
Yes.
The wild thing about that card, and I don't know if you're going to pop it up on the screen, but it basically exiles anyone's graveyards as soon as it comes out, and anything they go to put in there, it will exile it. So first of all, you're shutting off Underworld Breach packages, all of these things. But the real, like, the juicy meat of that card is the fact that, say opponent A, your player C, say opponent A goes to jam their ad naus. Player B counters the ad naus, and now that ad naus hits the graveyard. And you, there with your Douthie Voidwalker, player C, you tap it and you're like, I'm going to cast that card for free now.
That's right. That's
so if
what
your opponents
does.
So if your opponents understand that interaction, what you have said is, hey, you better not cast that ad naus unless you're ready to protect the heck out of it or lose this game.
That's exactly right. Which is amazing.
It's so good. So now these individual silver bullet pieces, things like we mentioned before, Rest in Peace. If you're playing a deck right now that can break parity on that card, slam it. I didn't used to play it in Dawnmaker Thrasios, but I made adjustments to the deck so I literally can play that card because it shuts down Underworld Breach packages. People, one of the things that I find funniest is that one big strategy to try and take on Underworld Breach right now is ad naus is things like Protean Hulk and Razaketh. Which also use the graveyard extensively. So if you're a deck that can play, like a mid-range deck that can play Rest in Peace, you're not only taking on the best decks in the format by shutting off their Underworld Breach plan, which, by the way, anyone saying that Thoracle is the way that most turboadnaus decks win is completely wrong. It is some combination of Underworld Breach that happens to use a Thoracle at the very end.
Yep.
So if you can,
exactly right.
Right, a protected Rest in Peace shuts that off. It shuts off any Protean Hulk synergies, shuts off Razaketh Reanimator synergies. Like that, Rest in Peace is just dumb, and it's really well positioned right now. So knowing some of these Silver Bullet cards, and it doesn't. It's not like you need to have this extensive knowledge of the format to like figure these things out. Just take a picture of what's happening in front of you, right? People are using their graveyards a lot. Play a Voidwalker, play Rest in Peace. People are trying to cast more than one spell a turn. Play a Rule of Law effect. I have seen a lot of stuff lately. For example, when I released my Cody video, people were talking about, or Sick Robot was telling me the other day, people were like, oh, well, I played against 3 stacked decks with Cody. Cody didn't do anything. How can it be close to one of the best decks in the format? It's like, yes, that is the worst matchup for a deck like that. Correct, that is what will shut it down, right? But knowing that like a turboadnaus deck, when it's mixed with a variety of these things, can try and push through that. But look at what is seeing play in the format. Look at what these cards are. I'm trying to play a bunch of spells in one turn and win the game. That's a thing to try and shut down, right? And there are many options out there. For example, decks that aren't playing white can still play Rule of Law type things with Damping Sphere, which is a card that taxes people more for the more they play, or Thorn effects or Sphere Resistance.
Void Mirror is really good against artifacts right now and against free spells right now.
Void Mirror is definitely one of those cards that I'm pretty low on, just because the fact it's really hard to break parity on.
I'm not saying it's the new hotness. I'm not saying that.
If you can break parity on that card, slot it in.
Absolutely.
It's really hard to do.
It is very difficult.
Yeah. But yeah, and really going back to that point, sorry, I kind of jumped off on a different point here, but some of the 2-mana interaction that hits stuff that other decks aren't is really strong right now. Dovin's Veto, we all kind of moved past Dovin's Veto. That card's still really good at stopping an Ad Naus, because a protected Ad Nauseam doesn't matter into a Dovin's Veto. If you're the kind of deck that can afford to play a 2-mana interaction, you're playing a mid-range plan, you're playing a grind plan, play your delays, your mana drains, your Dovin's Vetoes. Now, you don't have to play all of them. You can still keep your 1-mana interaction. Be a little greedy, that's okay. But if you really want to say, like, I at the table want to be able to stop these things, stop them.
Yeah. All right. So another thing that I've usually have found that has been really effective in stopping an Ad Nauseam strategy is making a frenemy. Like making a friend out of my opponent for that thing, and getting them to help me if maybe an Ad Nauseam deck or strategy might overwhelm me. Can you talk about anything along those lines?
Yeah, totally. A big part of CEDH is, and to be clear here, do this with respect. You have to always treat your opponents with the same respect that you want to be treated with. I just want to be clear about that, because there are times when that comes up, and I've even had people, I've had people in YouTube comments be like, "Hey, sometimes you're a little rough with the other people on the table," but like you have to have talks and talk with people in these conversations, and it can be tough sometimes. So for example, this is one of my favorite examples of this, is that I was playing in one of the early tier 1 cons, and I was playing Winota. It was the first one, and my opponent goes for a board wipe here, and I said, hey, look, I get that you're under my stacks right now, totally, I get that you want to remove it and it's part of your game plan and you need to remove them, but the person behind you in turn order is playing Mad Farm. They have a full 7, and they have not done anything this entire game, which means that they have been sculpting the hand that as soon as the stacks is removed will win this game. And they tutored enough where it wasn't like, okay, they could just not have it. They had it 100%. It was a Tsunami, who's actually a really fantastic player, was in the Mean 16 with me. And Tsunami was in that game, and I knew if all the stacks goes away and you tap out for this Toxic Deluge, Tsunami untaps, Mad Farm, does his thing, wins the game. So it's like, you can't do a full Deluge here. Sure, get rid of some of the stuff that's really bugging you down. So I think we decided the player went for Pyroclasm instead, took out a bunch of the 2 toughness creatures, so I wasn't going crazy, but kept like something like the Eidolon of Rhetoric on the battlefield, where Tsunami wasn't able to just untap and then completely take advantage of that game, and we weren't just going to lose. So having that conversation with that player, because in that mindset, you're right, they were focused on my game plan. My game plan means that I need to remove this board right now so that I can go for my win next turn, right? But putting it in perspective for them, being like, hey, your game plan will totally be put into a position where you have the chance to win next turn, but you'll never get to that turn.
Yep.
And a big part of that is being observant, right? I actually, it still to this day, especially when I'm playing more of a proactive strategy, will lose to just not opening my eyes. I stormed off the other day and went for an Underworld Breach line, and there was a Drannith on the battlefield.
Yep.
And that was, I had exact mana to like go off, and turn main phase Ad Nauseam, just right into a Drannith, and I was like, yep, all right, well, I really clowned myself here.
And anybody who mocks him for that has obviously never played a game of Magic in their lives, because everyone has been there.
Everyone's done it.
Everyone.
And it's like just taking a second to observe the table. And if you're playing with someone newer, if you're playing with someone who maybe doesn't play in as aggressive a turbo meta as you, if you're playing with someone who doesn't play in an open meta as much as you do, I've played with people who, think of a deck like Elsha that's like relatively popular, but it's definitely a specific choice. So if you've never seen an Elsha in your local meta, and suddenly your opponent's like, all right, I'm going to cast my Sensei's Divine Top, and your other opponent's like, they have a misstep, and they're like, all right, sounds great. And you're like, whoa, freeze.
Yeah, hold on a second.
Dear friend, could I convince you to not give them a win con?
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's not about, I think some people misconstrue that it's not about telling other people what to do, but it's about being a team, because CEDH is about being on 3-person teams 3 times. So yeah, if that's, which is probably a very confusing way to say that, but you are always trying to position yourself to win this game, but you have 2 allies, very, very light allies who will turn on you in an instant, but you have 2 temporary allies with you at all times. So like player B, C, and D do not want player A to win, right? And that is always going to be the truth of the matter. But they also have to respect the fact that there is a turn order, and people untap, and people who look like they're doing nothing and can't help in that moment. There's just, it's like chess. There's many moves ahead, and I'm terrible at chess. But for some reason, this nonsense makes sense to me. It's in just knowing that you can communicate with your table, and once again, do so in a way that you're saying, be genuine with them. I know obviously there are times when you have to leave details out. I used to have a friend who would get very frustrated with me on the Nexus because they'd be like, man, sometimes I believe you so much, you're like a magician. I was like, I'm not trying to bamboozle you here, because 90% of what I'm saying is genuine. You're like, we will lose to this right now. I cannot answer it. Yeah, maybe I'll untap and win, but this is the threat at the table right now. And that's sort of like the next level politicking of like, say just enough to make sure everyone is doing what needs to be done. But even if you have to say, I have done this in many, many games before, where you say, hey, look, I know my board looks threatening. I'm going to show you my hand right now. I have 4 lands. I'm not winning this game. This player is about to go off right now. I need you to not be greedy and try to untap. Or even so, I have a counter spell. Please don't make me use this on you, because we lose to the next player. And sometimes you really just gotta be communicative. And that's, turn order is the biggest killer in CEDH.
It can be.
Not thinking about what's next in turn order is, I think, the thing that strikes the most people. And ironically, it's the thing that can be like the biggest revelation to make someone listen to you, is they're like, oh my god, I didn't even think about next turn. And trusting that, looking at your actions or your opponent's actions and saying, okay, what is the cascade of this? I know for a fact they've tutored 2 turns in a row. If you don't tap, or if you tap out right now for your value engine, we lose this game. And there are people who will take advantage of that, and they'll be like, oh, well, I'm going to tap out on my turn, so you have to hold up your interaction, right? It's a big part of this game is measuring the people at the table. Are they going to be your friend? Are they going to listen to you? Or are they going to work with you to try and at least like get to a certain point in the game? I've had people I trusted in games really come to bite me. I've said, one person, for example, the Mean 16, I was in a game where someone was about to go off, and I was like, hey, we need to work together to get these resources. I can't crack my treasures with this dockside. And they were like, okay, I can silence that opponent on their turn. So they played a Grand Abolisher. I didn't crack treasures with dockside, thinking we were on the same page of, hey, let's disrupt the next player together. I'm not going to interact with you. And they went off, and they won during that turn.
Mm-hmm.
It happens. And I've personally... You just have to be able to read the table and know when people are working with you. And be that voice. Be the voice of... And sometimes you're not going to pick up on these things. Sometimes you're not going to see everything that's happening. Sometimes you don't know every single of the 150 decks in the database that exist.
Exactly.
But the more you know and the more information you can share with whoever are your allies at the time, the better understanding you can be. I just played a game the other day where we didn't communicate enough. We were going for a draw, and the player and I didn't talk enough about what the opponent could do to stop us, and we lost that game because of it.
When a lot of people get into CEDH, they frequently come from EDH. They come from regular Commander.
Right.
And there is this stigma that kind of follows them from EDH into CEDH, because everybody who is in CEDH says there's no rule 0 and everything is played to the letter of the law. And so there's this like this marching orders almost, if you will, going into this format. So they enter with almost this preconception of politics. Yeah. It is common knowledge that you politic inside of Commander. Mm-hmm. I didn't say regular EDH. I didn't say CEDH. I said Commander. Yeah. The 100%. Whole format on all ends of the spectrum. Yeah. Because you have too many people to stop with 7 cards in hand.
Exactly.
Simple as that. You've got too many. There's not enough resources to stop 3 opponents. So you have to engage a different level in order to be able to stop these people. Yeah. And they do it all the time in regular Commander. Mm-hmm. And when you bring it up to a CDH level, some people start to look at it like treachery or deceit. Oh, you're lying to me. You're deceiving me. You're a bad person. There's stigma that comes with it. You're abusing this system. Yeah. And that's not the case. Mm-hmm. Going back to what you were saying, communicate. Yeah. It's not necessarily about I'm going to manipulate this person, as I laugh maniacally. I'm here to let you be aware of something that you might be not focusing on. Hey, the person right after you sculpted a perfect 7 through two tutors and is waiting for you to remove that stack so they can win. Don't
happens all the time.
Yeah. Do not do it. Mm-hmm. And you have to start thinking of it more like if you're going to, have a little bit of a shroud or a cloak, it needs to be framed more like bluffing than it is lying. Yeah. So lying and saying, I don't have the adnaus, and then immediately having the adnaus, people aren't going to like that. No. They're not going to respect that. Yep. But, or saying, I don't have the answer, you need to answer it, and then you answer them right back. Yep. That's lying. Yeah. Never. But something more along the lines of bluffing, like they do in common card games like poker, where they're feigning certain things, is a lot different. You're saying, look, I'm going to need you to stop this because I don't know if we're going to be able to win or not. Yeah. Or you say, if you don't stop this, he or she is going to win right now. Yes, right now. And then you're not even going to get your chance. Yeah. So I think this is such an underdeveloped topic. Agree. Not enough people are talking about this social aspect in a CEDH level. Yep. And so that's why we start to always have these conversations about, well, that's the best deck in the format. Piloting, skill, politicking can be just as important as the deck you play.
Now, for example, like Michael V. Levine.
Mm-hmm. He's the classic example. Yes. I love him. Go ahead.
No one thinks that Heliod is the best deck in the format. But when you put that loaded gun in Michael's hand, you know that as a political player, as someone who can sequence their plays correctly, he will get results, right? And especially, I've been in games with Michael, and fantastic at pretending. I'm not even pretending, but like, I actually, this is even a slighter tangent to that, but it's very relevant. It's the Mean 16. I played it, which was a bunch of tournament winners from the past, from 2020, and played with people like Michael and many others from the format. Spleen Face, who's a fantastic player and fantastic just at the game. And so you're playing with all these players, and you realize that everyone does that. I'm pointing out a fact. This is a fact about the game. And I will say, I have literally never lied in a game of CEDH. Never. And I refuse to do so, and I will take that to my grave. Now, will I point something out in the game? And I'm there are going to be times in the game where I'm like, hey, this player is literally about to win this turn. And like, yeah, I'm behind them, and I do have a win in my hand. I'm not lying. Never intend to do so, and I will never lie in a game of CEDH. There are going to be times where that's what you have to do to win, where you slightly bluff, right? But when people push it to that point, I'm not going to go off this turn, and then they do, I'm never playing with that player again, right? Yeah. Like, that's for me, that's not the kind of game I need to play. At the end of the day, this is a hobby, right? It's something that people enjoy. It's fun. If you feel like you need to lie to like create that level of treachery, don't. Yeah.
However, people play Magic to have fun. It's a game. They play to have fun, even at the CDH level.
Yes. Competitive is more of a concept than a necessity. And actually, going back to your initial point about the Rule Zero part, I find that conversation so funny that people are like, CEDH doesn't care about Rule Zero. And it's like, that is the Rule Zero of CEDH. That is exactly what it is. Everyone says, I want to play the best stuff, and I don't. And we just want to try and win the game. That's the conversation. That is the Rule Zero. Rule Zero asks you to have a conversation with your pod. The term CEDH is us saying, instead of having a conversation, I'm going to put this little label on my deck box that says CEDH, and you're going to understand our entire Rule Zero conversation without having to talk for 20 minutes.
Exactly, without having to sit down and be like, all right, well, what'd you bring? And what kind of experience are you looking for? Yes. Not to knock on Rule Zero conversations, but exactly. It's terse, it's concise. You're saying, this is how I want to play. And they're like, great, let's do it.
Great. It's like, I don't think spite plays are fun. That's part of that. All of this, there is like it's like when they printed the basic land that had all the official text for basic lands. That's the term CEDH. You see the island and you're like, wow, I don't need to know all the text on an island. I know what a basic island does in the game of Magic, right? That's the term CEDH. It is that giant text script that we all get. There's a concept behind it, and you stick it on there, and you're just like, CEDH. All right, done. Hey, totally understand this Rule Zero conversation. Don't even need to talk about it.
Can we just talk about what a fantastic analogy that just was for CEDH? I should almost run those full text islands now, just on principle. Be like, no, this is my CEDH island. It's my CEDH island.
Do you want to get this very specific reference? Listen to our podcast.
Exactly.
It's a plug. It's a metaphor. It's everything you need.
It's the perfect. I mean, I'm peeling back the onion. There's so many good layers here. I love it.
We've been paid by WotC to sell these islands. I'm so sorry.
That's good. So going back to what you were saying about Michael Levine.
Yeah. So a fantastic player who can take the conversation of, as you mentioned, people default to best decks, because in 60 card, it is one person versus one person, and at the end of the day, it is a grinding of resources. There is no need to attribute resources indirectly, right? You don't need to throw resources at another player and then realize, oh no, I forgot about this person. Because in 60 card, you can't forget about the other person because they're the only one else there. Right. Storm is an argument, but
I mean, the dynamics are so different.
So wildly
from 1v1
different.
60 card.
Right.
It's so different because you're like, you don't have to, every time you cast a card, you're not giving an opponent advantage.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many more dynamic layers to it. It's not even enough for this podcast, but
I've had people legitimately think like you mentioned before that I'm some sort of like psycho puppet master. And for anyone who knows me on a personal level, I'm a giant clown. So the idea that I am suddenly this manipulative, like, person in the background is so comically wrong. But a lot of, like, genuinely, I'm a very passionate person. So a lot of my politicking that ends up being successful for me is legitimately me being like, hey, like, I'm really afraid we're going to lose to this person. And like, yeah, I'm not going to point out myself, obviously, but it's not me like spinning my web of lies. It's me being like, no, we're going to lose to this person. I pride myself in my evaluation of a board state, despite my comments about Drannith Magistrate earlier. In my ability to know when I've spent hours and hours and hundreds of hours learning about this ridiculous sub format we have, and that analyzing the table is something I feel very proud of, and I can usually know when a player is going to go off or take advantage of another player's moves. And that's that conversation, right? That's the part of that conversation that we have there. And so when I say to another player, hey, if you tap out here, we lose this game, it's not me going, yes, and if you tap out even more, I will win. It's me saying, we're literally going to lose to this player, please.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose the game as much as you don't want to lose the game.
It goes back to the alliance.
Yeah.
You know, I have 3 opponents, but that doesn't mean I can't strike up an alliance to make sure that player C isn't going to win and end this whole game.
Exactly.
It's about alliances, and they can be forged and broken in a matter of phases.
Moments. Yes.
Quite frankly. Yeah.
And despite our conversation earlier talking about, I think that's why people default to stacks as the way to counter Ad Nauseam, right? Because you don't need to talk to people to play a deafening silence, right? It's not about the game. You're not positioning yourself. You're saying, hey, Ad Naus player, you're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's your way
of
saying
the burden on yourself.
Yeah.
To stop everything.
To stop everybody and everything. And you're saying, I'm going to stop you, and I'm going to stop you, and I'm going to stop you, and then I'm going to win with a really janky combo later that breaks parity on all of this. Exactly. And I'm not saying all stack stacks are janky combos, but like, take a peek at them. They're all pretty whack in comparison to like Thoracle Consult.
I mean, whack is a strong word.
Yeah.
But what they are is they're a lot more involved in order to get there.
Yes.
Kiki
much
combo
more
through a birthing pod line is a lot more steps involved versus Thoracle Consult.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I play all those combos, right? Like I think as far as like simplicity sake, they're not that. But
no,
they can. That's why the stacks player is often attributed as the silver bullet against Ad Naus. When I think the best way to really tackle it is what we've been talking about here, is using your voice when your cards won't do the trick. Yeah, you can hold up a delay, and you can be a responsible member of the table. And that's where the mid-range deck comes in. And that's why I think you see a lot of really good players playing mid-range decks into this format, is because they're never going to be in the position where they're like, I have to counter this spell here and I can't. Or I should never is obviously hyperbole, but using their words, they should never be in that position, because the deck it has enough card quality where it's not like the deck will fail them if they play well, right? So I find that strategy is much more effective at taking down these turbo Ad Naus strategies, working with your teammates while playing things of a higher card quality, as opposed to playing that stacks. And it's once again, it's back to the easy answers. People want the easy answers to fight Ad Naus. They want to play a deafening silence and then say, I'm done with that player for the rest of the game. Now I only have to worry about this Sisse player who also plays deafening silence, right? It just doesn't, it's not 1v1. It doesn't work that way.
That's right. It doesn't.
And I'm not trying to say don't play stacks into this meta, because if you are a good stacks player, you can break parity on all this stuff and absolutely run over a table.
Absolutely.
But the most effective thing to use in this meta right now, especially, is your voice and your reasoning, and asking players to not be greedy. A lot of these local metas, people in these local metas I know they come to you all the time. I know they come to me all the time asking about, like, how do I take down Ad Naus? I just feel like if you can't beat him, join him. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck in this. And talk, have a conversation. Don't be that Magic player staring at your cards and it's like, what am I gonna do to individually stop 3 Ad Nauseam decks? You're never gonna individually stop 3 Ad Nauseam decks.
That's right. Just like you said, when the Ad Nauseam player is against 3 stacks, our meta is so diverse.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just not going to win a pod.
Mm-hmm.
Just like how the stacks deck shouldn't be thinking that they're the sole responsibility of being table police.
Yep.
At a pod.
Yeah.
You're allowed to share the burden, I would almost call it, if you will. So you don't have to overcommit your resources just to get hosed by a toxic deluge later.
Exactly.
You got to share the burden, share the load, share the responsibility. Let somebody else answer the problem.
And
I think that if you do that, you will find how much more you will end up winning when you realize the 4-player aspect of this 4-player game.
Exactly. You see a lot of this happen, especially this is like the classic example, because people who play like Control in Modern, they tend to like naturally gravitate towards CEDH because they're like, oh, what, the same stuff I can do, but like with fast mana, and I can do it all super speeds, and I can play with a bunch of my friends at the same time. Whoa! And,
exactly.
And then they're like, well, why can't I play blue-white Control in CEDH? And you're like, because in what world are you so arrogant that you think one player can take on 3 players and be like, counter your thing and your thing and your thing, supreme verdict? You think that's gonna work? When all 3 of them are like, oh, this guy thinks he can take us on.
Yeah. You got Selvala, you got Godo, and you've got Ad Nauseam all at the table, and you're like, yeah, you're gonna stop all 3, no problem.
Yeah, sure, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a humbling moment there coming over, which is good. It's
like one of the most
moment,
classic
but
examples.
also at the same time, it teaches everybody. Yeah. It's exactly right. It teaches everybody how to. So even if you are the Ad Nauseam player or you're against the Ad Nauseam player, how are you going to be able to correctly navigate these waters?
I've had many times playing Grog Silas, which is notably considered the fastest deck in the format. I have played games in that deck where I play a Mana Vault and then hold up a Swan Song for 3 turns in a row because I'm not going to fall into someone's interaction, and I'm going to work with my table in that circumstance, because you bet that deck's card quality goes down real fast, real quick. You got to work with your table there, right? So this conversation isn't just beating Ad Nauseam from the perspective of a mid-range deck or a stacks deck. It's beating Ad Nauseam even if you are trying that strategy, or even if your deck touches into that strategy.
Okay, and with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. So a big thanks to Ian for being on the show today. I learned a lot about some good things with Ad Nauseam. Just talking about it in general is always really beneficial, and hearing just the different ideas about it, and just getting a better understanding of what this card/strategy is, and actually more importantly is not in this format. So really big thanks to Ian for being on the show. Huge help. Ian, where can you let the listeners/viewers know where you are and what you got coming up?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before at the start of the episode, youtube.com/comedianmtg. That's where you find the majority of everything I do. I participate in leagues and tournaments and things all the time, and I definitely mention those things. If you ever want to know like the best place to contact me, it's Discord. There is a Discord that I include in the show notes of all my videos, and I can send that to you as well, Ryan. And I'm go out of my way a lot of the time to make sure to be able to talk to the people who ping me on Discord and who jump into the server, because I really appreciate the engagement. I am as passionate about this format as the average person who jumps into the Discord, or even more so. So I love talking about it, and the more people who come in, have conversations. Recently in the Discord, we started brewing a lot, which is awesome, because that's like my favorite thing to do, is just take a commander or a strategy that, like, we've been brewing a lot with Doomsday lately, which is long considered outdated, and now we're playing around with that, and we had some fantastic people, Gustav and Dragoon, working on a primer for the database, all based around Doomsday. And it's Gustav, who top forward the your tournament with that Ikra Krom Citadel list, was actually it was brewed in the Comedian MTG Discord, which is pretty awesome. Gustav is a fantastic patron, great member of the community.
That's awesome.
And so most of the content will be found on the YouTube channel. A lot of stuff analyzing gameplay, analyzing the stuff in this format. I'm pretty entrenched, so if you want a reasonably entrenched perspective on a variety of different places to play around the format, I try to spread my wings as much as possible, play in a ton of different places, and that's kind of what I go for. So and obviously always excited to brew new stuff.
Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. So tune in next time when we talk about our favorite format in our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching / listening, and we will see you next time.